fundamentally, every trigger is pointing to the underlying shared root fear that we all have, which is disconnection or separation. Every single trigger is relating to that, and it goes back to our primary infantile needs. And by infantile, I don't mean that in a derogatory manner. I mean it literally. As infants, we experienced either sufficient holding and union and trust in the transition from complete bond with mother to a distinction between mother and child, and mother, father, and child, sibling, etc. So if we experienced sufficient transition and balance in that journey, and were nurtured in a way that we felt profound trust in this journey of the aloneness of ourself as one self-being in comparison to other individual self-being, and that we're still absolutely one with all of creation. So if that is intact, then our autonomous nervous system is in balance between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, and we're able to navigate our way through challenges of togetherness, separation, togetherness, separation. However, our human condition is such that we're living in a way that has deeply damaged our relationships, our foundational development of being able to have that transition well nurtured. And so pretty well every human on the planet has trauma stored in the nervous system. There are parts of the self and the psyche that still feel unmet, unprotected, unloved, literally in a state of separation, disconnection, rejection, isolation, etc. And so every time an event occurs that represents even the slightest threat of rejection, separation, isolation, judgment, ostracization, being other, being misunderstood, etc., 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 even the slightest indication of that triggers off those infantile stored traumas of unmet needs. And that is why it is so hot, so uncontrollable, seemingly uncontrollable, because it is literally the infant, the baby, the child throwing up into reaction. It is not the mature, evolved mind and emotional body that is dealing with it. And that is why it can be extremely difficult when one is triggered to navigate that experience. So, in the midst of this then, it's very, very important, first of all, to understand that really identifying what triggered it is not as essential in the process of reconciling these conflicts, because the what is just another story, another part of another version of that same root cause. And if we strip that right down, that root cause is the need and the desire to know oneness despite separation, the need and the desire to know love and unity despite difference. So that's at the root of it all. Now, when faced with the trigger, it can be very difficult, of course, for the mature spiritual mind to say, oh, well, now just don't worry about that, because really, in truth, we are all one. And despite our differences, don't worry, you're not really rejected. This is just another human's wounds and traumas that's being projected and triggered off and reacted at you. And so let's go round and round and round the same circle together. Very difficult for that mature spiritual self to speak in that moment, right? Which is why the work we do in the spaces we have preceding our interactions that potentially may trigger us off are so important. So I'm going to speak to that before I get to what you can then do when it is triggered off. Okay, so yes, you've been practicing meditation and breathing techniques, etc. But what I really want to point to very specifically is understanding that it's about strengthening and knowing how to activate and heighten your parasympathetic nervous system. That's the part of your system that calms, that heals, that nurtures, that restores balance. And there's a lot of exercises we can do to strengthen that, and that's really critical because trauma is held in the nervous system. Okay, so look into anything you can do to strengthen your parasympathetic nervous system. Again, specific breathing methods, specific exercises. Yoga is really critical, really important. And for those of you who maybe don't do yoga yet, well, think about stretching, even just doing stretches that concentrates on your back can help switch on your parasympathetic nervous system or heal and strengthen the vagus nerve. Okay, so that's going to help calm everything and balance everything. So doing all that preparatory work means that you're less likely to be as triggered. Now, what happens when you are triggered? There you are in that moment, like you say, everything's hot, and well, there's a physiological root to this. As I said, what's been triggered? Your sympathetic nervous system has gone into overdrive. That's the fight-flight response. So you can't even identify what it is because, as I said, that's so far back in the unconscious mind. It's not your mind that can work it out. It's actually your nervous system that's dealing with it. So your nervous system's gone, right, threat, bang, let's go into fight-flight mode. Sympathetic nervous system has gone on. It's sent off a cascade of chemicals. Why most people feel that trigger first in that part of the gut is because that's where the adrenals are. Ding, the adrenals go off. Cortisol gets charged through the body. It sends a rush to the heart, and the heart starts going, and the body heats up. That's a physiological response. So how do you deal with that? In the moment, first of all, being aware, okay, your sympathetic nervous system has been switched on big time. What helps calm that? Very specific postures, breathing, and movement. If you're in the middle of an interaction with someone, then it's really important that you learn specific methods that can act very quickly without putting you in a position of feeling like you are dishonoring the person you're interacting with by all of a sudden just behaving differently or weirdly or ignoring the situation. So you might learn just how to touch yourself in a certain way, in a certain place, like, just start touching certain points on your body. You can learn certain points that help stimulate parasympathetic nervous system. You can do the 3 deep full breaths of alpha breathing. You can another quick one, which I teach, a very specific method that strengthens the parasympathetic nervous system, is placing the tongue on the roof of the mouth and swallowing at the same time. And so you can do that even if you are, in company with someone. You can actually just consciously pause place your tongue there on the roof of the mouth. Make sure you have a good amount of saliva in your mouth, and keeping your tongue on the roof of your mouth, swallow. See if you can do that 3 times. And that's going to help the system calm down, switch on the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, what to do when you can walk away from that situation? You mentioned particularly that if you don't do something with that energy, usually you throw it out. Okay, so like you said, you go into reaction mode and you project that energy out. And that's because this energy is too much for our physiology. We need to throw it off. We need to throw it out. However, we know also that if we do it in the typical, interrelational reactive manner, it's very destructive. It's very damaging. It perpetuates and adds more damage to our nervous system and our relationships. So what is important is you recognize, okay, this is energy that needs to be thrown out. It needs to be thrown off. It needs to be moved. It's not actually the story that needs to be thrown out. Okay, it's energy. It's accumulated traumatic energy. It's a chemical rush in the body. And this is why I teach unveiling and Shakti Shake. And I don't know if you've read Awakening You, but in that book I go through all these core principles and understandings and methods to deal with and meet these challenges. And so the principle of that is, first and foremost, it's energy. Okay? It's all energy. So even when we get to the root of the cause or the trigger, it's to do with an energy, an energetic state of our relationship with life. We either feel safe energetically and in right relationship of our sense of our own individual self, other self, and whole oneself. We either feel right with that, or we feel fractured, we feel disconnected. And so we're either in a state of harmony or discord. And so because it's all energy, it's not so much about the story. The story's just been attached to that state of energy. It's about coming back to what's happening energetically. And that means if you've got this heightened, hot, volcanic energy, rather than allowing it to erupt through the mind and the emotional body, allow it to erupt through your physiology. And so you can deliberately channel that energy. You can excuse yourself. If you've been in an interaction, you can say, look, something has happened. I really want to honor you and myself in the right way, and I just need a few moments. So you might take yourself to another room or go outside and do some really cathartic breathing and shaking of the body. And doing that does 2 things. First of all, it throws off, it's cathartic, so it empties out all of that tense energy. It channels it in a way that is non-reactive. And secondly, it switches on the parasympathetic nervous system. So every time you do that, you strengthen your vagus nerve. And you strengthen it not by indulging the story, but by restoring the homeostasis of your physiological energy. That's what it's about. Yeah. And so once you acquire that kind of calmed down state, then of course what's going to happen, the mature spiritual part of your mind, your consciousness, can come to the forefront and can hold course. And you're back at the helm of your ship again.